Uh-oh, don't
Well,
touch
good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Polt. I'm here to welcome you to the 21st Annual Satchmo Summerfest presented by Chevron, and welcome you to the Satchmo Legacy Stage in memory of Joni Berry. I'm so happy we're all here together after some tumult. I think we call it tumult, I believe. This is the only festival in Louisiana dedicated to Louis Armstrong, and it's produced by French Quarter Festivals Incorporated. Let's give a big hand to them, Emily Madero and her staff. They do such a great job, and it is so glorious to be back here. This festival is made possible through the generosity of our sponsors, which I will get to in a moment, and is supported through your purchase of official festival merchandise and cold drinks. And it's hot out there, so when you go outside, you'll get hot. Then you'll buy a cold drink, and then that helps the festival for next year. I mean, it's a win-win. Refreshment, and then you feel good about you'll come back next year. Remember to do your part to keep us healthy, keep those masks on. They said I'm so handsome, you gotta take it off when you come and talk. I wanna thank our long list of sponsors. Of course, Chevron, give Chevron a big hand. As you can see, their logo is a chevron. The New Orleans Jazz Museum at the Mint. Give the museum a big hand, and Aiden and Travis back there making it happen for us. Also the Ella Fitzgerald Charitable Foundation, Janice Fox. Janice is back there, give her a hand. And although they can't be here, they're in New Jersey watching on the Facebook live stream, I'm sure. Vicky and Richie Norigian, give them a hand. And finally, I want to, as it says here, it's the Satchmo Legacy Stage in memory of Joni Berry. Joni Berry was a great friend of this festival. You know, when you become part of this, especially this part of it, used to be the seminars, now the Legacy Stage, it's like you become part of a family, and she was a big part of it. With her husband, Stephen Maitland Lewis. Sadly, Joni passed away from COVID-19 during 2020. So we have dedicated the stage to her. So please give a big round of applause for the Joseph and Inez Eichenbaum Foundation and Stephen Maitland Lewis. Stephen, thank you so much. I urge you to take a look. There's a big poster, one of these, that detail Joni's life and her interests. She was the head of the Professional Dancer Society for some 24 years. She danced with the likes of Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor, and we miss her greatly. And Stephen, I just want to thank you for all you've done for us. Finally, before I introduce our first presenters here, I just want to take a moment. This building is very much tied to Don Marquis. Don Marquis was he was the head of the Jazz Museum, the curator for many years. You might have seen there's a Don Marquis reading room here. He lived here for some 60 years. He wrote a very important pioneering book on Buddy Bolden. If you were interested in jazz in New Orleans in the last 40 years, you knew Don Marquis, and he did something for you. And Don, he was in ill health last August. They had a send-off for him, and he passed away on the 29th, and we're going to miss him. Find out about him, too. He was a great man and great fun, and we will certainly miss Don. So, anyway, let's get started. So we have 4 hours. Oh, there it goes. 4 hours for you today. After this first one, we're going to have Christopher Renshaw with talking about his musical, What a Wonderful World, that will debut in Miami in December. And then Gwen Tompkins of the Music Inside Out show will interview Adonis Rose. And then Riccardi, you might have heard of him, He does some stuff with Louis Armstrong. He'll be here to do videos from Louis's final year, 1971, and that'll be at 4 o'clock to end our big doings here. Okay, so you know Ricky Riccardi, I'm sure. How many of you have met Ricky Riccardi? Okay, Ricky, there's one woman over here. Just go introduce yourself and we're done. Ricky, of course, he's been here since 2008. He came to his first Satchmo Summerfest and has been perhaps, what do they call it in the circus? The nut. You got to make the nut. He has been that which we cannot do the festival without. There was one time where, how many? You were doing the children's stage. You did just about everything. As I said, it's a family. He came in 2008, and he's almost the head man now. But he's the director of research collections and archivist at the Louis Armstrong House Museum. How many of you have read one of his 2 books on Armstrong? Many of you. Okay. Those others? How did the FedEx delivery go? No. Okay. Well, you could order it.
No, they're at Octavia. I signed about 40 books this morning.
Okay, they're at Octavia Books, so head up there on Octavia Street, Uptown. His first book, What a Wonderful World, The Magic of Louis Armstrong's Later Years, and then just last year, Jazz Times Book of the Year, Heart Full of Rhythm, which you might have heard him talk about yesterday in the context of the videos. So a big hand for Ricky Riccardi. To talk about Louis Armstrong and a trip to Louisiana, he is joined by Maxine Gordon. I'll give Maxine a big hand just to start because she's here. She's an independent scholar with a lifetime career working with jazz musicians as an oral historian and archivist in jazz and African American cultural history. Her book, Sophisticated Giant, The Life and Legacy of Dexter Gordon, fulfilled the promise she made to her late husband, Dexter Gordon, to complete his biography. The New York Times called it a work of considerable sophistication, among other great things. Currently, she's working on a book quartet, stories about the lives of 4 African-American women jazz musicians, Velma Middleton, Maxine Sullivan, Shirley Scott, and Melba Liston. Also, she was, when she was here in 2017, she was the recipient of the first Bjorn Barnheim research grant from the Tulane Jazz Archive, and she used that to research Zulu, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, and which she presented in 2018. We are just thrilled to have her back, part of a dog and pony touring show, the Maxine and Ricky Show, Ms. Maxine Gordon.
Thank you. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, I'm not too loud? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you to Sabrina. Thank you to the Satchmo Summerfest, to everybody who made this happen in a time when we didn't think this could happen. Last year it did not. But when I found out that I got an email saying, well, we can't really bring any outside people this year because, you know, COVID and all, but Ricky will be here, then I invited myself. So I sent an email to Ricky saying, you can't go without me. And he was like, well, what are we going to do? But they fixed it. So it's not the first time I invited myself. But I'd like to meet the person from the Ella Fitzgerald Foundation because we have a nonprofit, the Dexter Gordon Society, and we're funded by by Ella. I call it Ella. It's Ella's money. And so then I was able to combine the funds and come here because Ricky and I have been doing this research that appeared because for my next book, where Velma Middleton is one of the subjects, of course, I'm nothing without Ricky Riccardi. I've been saying this since I met him when I was doing the research for the Dexter Gordon biography because Dexter played with Louis Armstrong in 1944. But I had no information on it. It was just like in his notes, Pops, 1944. So, of course, I had to go to Ricky. I don't know what year it was.
2014? 2015.
Oh,
somewhere
by
around
the
there.
way, he has a photographic memory, so don't ever do anything if you don't want him to remember it. But I went to him and I was like, oh, could I see, do you have anything on Dexter Gordon? And he was like, I don't see anything listed, but if you come here to the archive, we can see what we can find. And so we knew 1944. So he pulls out what he had on 1944 photos and I think itinerary, whatever you had in the archive before it was digitized.
Right.
This is when you went to an archive and you sat at the table. I had my chair at the table. I always sit in the same chair at his archive. And he brought a photo out and he said, this is from 44. And then I was like, well, that's Dexter because he has big feet and he's taller than everybody and he looks like Dexter Gordon. He looked exactly the same. And so that began my way of researching that year that Dexter was with him. And then I said to him, well, who's the woman in the white dress? So she was standing on the side of this first photo, and it's Velma Middleton, but I didn't know. So I said, well, who's that? And I always remember the look, because if you're a jazz fan, you know when you don't know something, but usually you don't, you pretend you know. But then, sometimes you say, who's that? And you get a look like, I thought you knew something about jazz, So he gave me the look, and he was like, it's Velma Middleton. I was like, okay. So I had to immediately start looking up Velma, and there wasn't much on her online or, and then I said, well, could I find out more? And so then I became, well, obsessed. I don't know. Would you call it obsessed?
It's a good obsessed, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And I said, oh, I have to know more about Velma. So for my next book, there's a section of her section. Each woman will have 3 parts of their talking as much as possible about their lives. And in 1952, Velma was on the cover of Jet. Okay. Now, you see that date, May what?
May 8th.
1952, famous fat women. So there she is. And I thought, what? Famous fat women, and it's like Mahalia Jackson, Ella, like all these like brilliant, gorgeous women referred to as fat. And I thought, okay, so I have like a whole section on that. And then I wanted to know, well, where would she have been when she saw the cover? I mean, I don't know, we can't know what she thought. We haven't found anything on a tape, or if they thought it was funny, or if she was, insulted or not.
That scan you see there is Louis Armstrong's copy.
Yeah.
So he saved it, and we
Yeah.
still have it at the archive. So,
Right.
It was definitely, I'm sure, a point of conversation.
I've studied the whole article, everybody else in it, who I hadn't heard of, but who now, and I write about them in the book. And then I said, oh, I wonder where she was. So of course you go to the genius here, and you were like, okay, May 1952, and he found itinerary, and then we found that she was on May 11th, Mother's Day, in Eunice, Louisiana, which I'd never heard of, excuse me, for people from Louisiana. And then when I looked up online, Berro's Eunice, just to see, like, where is it, we found a blog by the grandson of the owner of the club. His name is Steve Picou. And then we contacted him, and we did a radio conversation, and then we said, okay, let's talk about that gig, and then after that, which we thought was in New Orleans, but of course, Ricky found out they went to
Breaking news.
Biloxi, Mississippi first. He found that out today.
This morning.
Said, oh, let's talk about that at Satchmo Summerfest, because what I found from research and what he's found is there's the big picture, the big story, but there's also, when you look at one day or one gig, because the itineraries, you have to take a nap when you look at a Louis Armstrong itinerary, worked 300 days a year for his whole life, and Velma was with him 20 years. So, I'm trying to understand where she went, and I tried to map it, but You know, there's a no play. I have to do it online. They went everywhere. They went everywhere, everywhere. So, but on this day, on Mother's Day, they were in Eunice, Louisiana. So then we thought, let's focus on what it was like for them on that one day. So that's what we're here to talk about.
So my perspective here is just to tell you what was going on in Louis Armstrong's life at this point, because 1952 was really a rebuilding year, and everybody knows the famous All-Stars of 1951 with Louis, Jack Teagarden on trombone, Barney Bigard on clarinet, Earl Father Hines on piano, Arvell Shaw on bass, Cozy Cole on drums. That was the 51 band. By the beginning of 52, Jack Teagarden's gone, Earl Hines is gone, and Arvell Shaw's gone. So half the band left in just a matter of months. Why? Of a few reasons. Earl Hines was sick of being a sideman. He never wanted to be a sideman. He thought he signed up for just a few months, and Glazer kept him there for 3 years, and so he was burnt out from that job. Jack Teagarden actually was in Hock with his big band before joining Armstrong, but now had some money and more exposure, so he went to lead his own bands till the end of his life. And Arvell Shaw actually was dating a woman from Switzerland, and he actually ended up going there, marrying her, went to music school, and he rejoined the band the summer of 52, but Louis needed some replacements. And I always call this, a sports term, it's a rebuilding year, because Louis had to, get back, and it took him a couple of years. By the time he gets to 53, 54, the band with Trumma Young on trombone, and Barrett Deems on drums, Arvell's back, Billy Kyle on piano. That's the famous mid-50s band. But 52, we're still going through some stuff. And so here is a super rare photo that was found in a scrapbook that belonged to the bass player, Dale Jones. Dale Deacon Jones was from San Francisco. He played with Teagarden. He played with some of the big bands. And he was a true showman. Most of his features were Burt Williams routines. So a white man Burt Williams routines in 1952, but Louis was obsessed with Burt Williams, so he loved when he did that. And Russ Phillips, the man holding the trombone there, he was from Colorado, and when the All-Stars were touring through Colorado, Jack Teagarden was sick. They needed a trombonist, and Russ Phillips was found. He sat in with the band, did a good job, and when Teagarden quit the band, Louis said, let's get that fat white cat who replaced Jack in Colorado. And Russ Phillips had his big moment. On piano, a legend of the Chicago school, Joe Sullivan. And for the Joe Sullivan fans, you might say, huh? Because Joe Sullivan and Louis Armstrong, you don't think of them together, and it's because Sullivan, by this point, was pretty much an alcoholic, and he lasted about 6 weeks in the band. There's a few bootleg recordings, and they are rough. They're playing the blues, and Sullivan's making all the wrong changes. And one night, he got so drunk, he fell off the piano stool, and Louis just said, get me a new pianist. And so Marty Napoleon was being booked by Joe Glazer. He was in a group, the Big Four, with Chubby Jackson, Buddy Rich, and Charlie Ventura. And so Marty Napoleon comes in. And Louis, from the minute he formed the All-Stars in 47, he demanded it be an integrated band. And so you have, a white trombonist, white bass player, and a white piano player. Then you have Cozy Cole, Barney Bigard, and Louis and Velma. And so integrated band. And here they are in May of 52 touring the Deep South. They begin the month in Texas. Where's Louis at his career? In May of 52, I was actually going through the newspapers. The movie The Strip with Mickey Rooney was still playing in theaters. And that was the film that introduced A Kiss to Build a Dream On, which at that point was probably the biggest hit of Louis's career. The album, Satchmo Serenades, had come out the first week of May, because I did a search on newspapers.com for what's Louis Armstrong, and every newspaper was reviewing Satchmo Serenades, and he had just put out a new single of Kiss of Fire, and everybody was saying this is going to be the next big hit. So Louis is riding a nice wave of popularity. He's got concerts, Decca records, albums, hit records, movies, all this stuff is happening for him. New band, integrated band. We already talked about Velma on the cover. And part of this Deep South tour, I found this literally this morning, because up until about 10 o'clock today, we thought, logically, that the Eunice gig on May 11th is, all right, we know that, and we know Louis plays New Orleans, the Municipal Auditorium, on May 13th. Now, wouldn't it make sense for him just to go in a straight line? On May 12th, I found out today, he was in a theater in the Keesler Theater in Biloxi, Mississippi. And as you'll hear when we show this video in a second, it actually makes sense because this is how Louis ended up in Eunice. Steve Picou's family, they knew a booking agent in Biloxi, and anytime the big acts would come through Biloxi, they would call and try to work out a deal to get Louis. So Louis actually goes from Houston to Eunice to Biloxi and then right back to New Orleans. And in Biloxi, he did 3 shows at 2, 7, and 9 on May 12th.
Wow.
And then drove back down to New Orleans on May 13th. We're going to talk about the New Orleans gig. I've got audio, which has never been issued from the New Orleans gig. But we should mention that Steve Picou was originally supposed to join us because he's got the family history. And because of COVID and just wanting to be safe, Steve didn't feel comfortable joining us in person. But he was kind enough to actually make almost like a 10-minute mini documentary with news clippings, photos from the night at Berro's in Eunice, and he interviewed his family. I think it is his parents, yeah, about that night. So we're actually going to turn it over to Steve. This would have been his portion if he had been here. But please enjoy this. It's about maybe 9-10 minutes long, but it really sets the stage for what Louis Armstrong integrated band touring the South. And what they had to deal with in this period.
My name is Steve Picou, and for a dozen years I worked at the Louisiana Music Commission under Ellis Marsalis, where I was part of a team that helped celebrate the 100th anniversary of jazz, secure the ceremonies for the Armstrong stamp, and supported efforts to get this event started. Thank you, Satchmo Summerfest, Maxine Gordon, and Riccardi, for inviting me to share my family's story about when Satchmo and his All-Stars played at my grandpa's nightclub on a cool Mother's Day night in 1952. Eunice, Louisiana was carved out of the Cajun prairie in 1895. A decade later, Berro Picou, his brother and father, opened the town's first pharmacy and bakery. By early 1951, Picou's drugstore was in the hands of his 2 World War II combat veteran sons, and Berro, known for his love of a good time, often was nowhere to be found. In late February, he showed up with a set of keys to a newly constructed club and said, "Let's bring some fun to this town." Berro's was an outlier during the Jim Crow era, a white-owned club unafraid to book black bands like the Ink Spots or the Platters. A mixed-race band like Louis Armstrong and his All-Stars didn't go unnoticed, and the family got threatening calls at the drugstore and their homes. In 1997, I talked to my parents about that night and the events leading up to it. I'm happy to share some of that interview with you today.
June 29, 1997, and I'm interviewing Eugene D. Cooney Picou and his lovely wife, Betty. How did you learn that Satchmo was available?
Well, I kept in touch with this booking agent in Biloxi that the name leaves me right now, but he was booking bands through a major booking thing. He was just an agent. And I kept in touch with him by telephone several times. He'd call me and tell me when he had a particular performer or something. And it so happened that Louis Armstrong was going from Houston to New Orleans, and it was going to be a Sunday night he was coming through here. And in most places, they had blue laws where you couldn't perform on a Sunday night. So we were in a parish that didn't have a blue law, and he was able to stop and do a night's work and then just continue on to New Orleans, which was only a 3.5-hour drive.
When did the threats begin?
About 2 weeks before, because I guess in our advertising and the word of mouth things that got around, we had a band with that was a mixed group, with black and white musicians, and they started calling at the drugstore, telling us that if we didn't want trouble, we better not let that band play there on that Sunday night, and threats like that, and they called my house.
They called your house?
Oh yeah, they called my house, and they called the drugstore. The FBI called them now.
Yeah. Who was it?
They never would tell us, but they caught them making the phone calls from the old Mar Hotel, which was just around the corner from the drugstore.
Who called the FBI?
We called the telephone company, and they got the FBI in on it because it was a time, back in the 50s there where they were having all that trouble at Little Rock and all those different places, It was a time of a lot of turmoil, and so the FBI kept pretty good dubs on that kind of stuff. Especially threatening phone calls.
Yeah. Where'd the band eat?
I really don't have any idea because Because they came in their bus from Houston and they just drove up and looked. The whole band.
What time did they get there? Do you remember?
Oh, I guess they got there about an hour before the performance. It was around 8 o'clock because they worked from 9 to 1.
So they got in just in time.
Well, you know, I mean, we were right on the highway that they were taking.
Yeah. Were you worried at all about them arriving?
Mm-mm. Not at all. In them days, a man's word was his bond, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Louis signed that his agent. Now, his agent showed up with him.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of look at this picture and see we never did have a big bar. You know, the bar
Yeah.
itself where people sat was
Right.
big.
Right.
But the
The
amount
stock
of
area,
the
yeah.
stock is not big.
Hmm.
But we never ran out. We had a
Well, you know, like I say, people would order simple things, you know, like
in a setup will hold
you
you all
take
night.
like Seagram 7, Seagram VO, and Early Times are your 3 big best-selling whiskeys. And any one of those 3s were the ones that they would order for setups, you know. It's very seldom they'd buy a bottle of gin or a bottle of vodka back in those days.
Did they have like a dressing room area, or did y'all have to do, or they just use the bus?
Well,
or?
no, what we had, this is the funniest thing about it to me because they came in the back door
Mm-hmm.
instead of the front door. And we were waiting for them at the front door, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And when Louis walked in, he said, Mr. Picou, I said, yeah, he said, I'm Louis Armstrong. I said, Louis, you have to tell me who you are. And he said, what do you want me to do tonight? And I said, look, Louis, I can't tell you what to do. I said, you just go out there and do what you know to do. I said, that's what people came to see is you. Because I guess he had been used to working at places where they said, you do this and you do that. So I just gave him carte blanche. I said, no, you guys just get up there and play. That's all I want y'all to do and entertain my customers and do it the way you know how to do it best.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, most of them, we had a part of the club that was intended to be a dining room at one time that we never really fully got into.
That was in that back corner?
No, it was in the front of the club.
Oh, okay.
And they stayed in there a great deal because it was near the ladies' restroom where Velma could go. And it wasn't too far from the men's restroom.
this is
We did have the kitchen in there, so, you know, there was refreshments and things for them and chairs for them to sit down and relax. But they really didn't take many breaks.
Were y'all cooking or anything that night?
No,
at all?
no. But they really didn't take very many breaks. They started playing at 9 o'clock. And around 10 o'clock, I know they took a break because Louis, I would stay near the bandstand as much as I could. And he asked me if I'd walk with him to the restroom. I said, well, Louis, you don't have to worry about anyone walking you to the restroom with these people. No, he said, if you don't mind, please walk me. So I'll walk with him, you know, through the crowd.
What did he?
And then
how long did it take him to get to the restroom walking through the
all
crowd?
the way across, man.
But I mean,
oh yeah,
no, nobody.
He didn't have to greet everybody that walked along.
no, you know, they'd holler at him and he'd wave, but you know, they didn't detain him.
Yeah.
It's not like nowadays.
Yeah.
And that's when he told me, he said, Mr. Picou, he said, you know, he said, these people are trying to dance and trying to listen to us. He said, we could just tell everybody to sit on the floor. Sit
Oh, you
down.
mean so the first set everybody did dance?
Yeah.
They tried to, but
They
it
tried
was
to, but
like
man,
that.
it was like
elbow to elbow, huh?
And so he said, if you don't mind, he said, we can put on a show for him. And he said, just tell him to sit on the floor. So I got on the microphone and I said, look, everybody came out here to hear Louis Armstrong and the All-Stars. And I said, Louis suggests that they'd like to put on a concert for you. So they want you to sit down on the dance floor wherever you can, make yourself comfortable where you can see and hear. And I said, I'm going to turn it over to them. And I did. I handed him the mic. And in fact, Velma Middleton put the mic on the dance floor off the bandstand. And they did Baby It's Cold Outside. Was
They
the first
played
number.
45 minutes without stopping. Just
Oh,
one
yeah, they
after
didn't.
the
I
other.
mean, they didn't stop.
Do you remember a lot of the songs?
Oh, no. Well,
Gosh, no, we were as enthralled with it as anybody else.
it was all his old favorites and stuff, though, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to. There was a couple of songs at the time that he had that was real popular on the jukebox. One of them was "Baby It's Cold Outside," and I want to say "Kiss to Build a Dream On." That was on the jukebox, but he had some pretty good records floating around at that time.
Yeah, he had been around a while. What kind of sound system did you have in those days?
It wasn't anywhere near as sophisticated as it is today, but I will have to say for what we had available to us at the time, you know, that it worked well because we would space our speakers throughout this huge club.
Oh, good. What did your parents think of the show after it was all over?
Oh, they were
What did they say?
They were just thrilled, you know what I mean? That's a once-in-a-lifetime deal when you can...
Were they big fans?
Oh, yeah, man. They all love music, you know.
Well, I know Alberta was, but I
But
mean,
Mom and Dad, my mother used, and Daddy were both, they love music, you
Yeah,
know. And Louis Armstrong was a household word with them, you know.
Velma Middleton was in fine form that night, thrilling the audience with her voice and athleticism, including her famous handstands. The band's fee was $1,500.
Yeah.
The sold-out crowd paid a ticket price of $2.75, and a highball was a quarter. Thanks again to Satchmo Summerfest, to Maxine and Ricky, and to all of you who continue to share in the love and grace of Louis Armstrong, whose vision of a wonderful world is possible when we all believe together.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve Picou.
Well, you can't do better than that. It was like, well, we could sit up here and speculate, and then we find him, and he was like, oh, I think we have some photos. So, when you look at the photos and hear him talk, well, for me, then I can see what she's wearing in her shoes and everything, because that's one of the things I'm writing about, is where'd she get the wardrobe? And remember, she's getting dressed on the bus, okay? And they leave right after the gig, get on the bus. We thought they went to New Orleans, but in fact, they would go
Not
to
yet.
Biloxi. How many hours was that?
3.5.
3.5. And
Today, according to Google Maps. Yeah, I don't know
But
what
do you
the
think
situation
they
was.
slept overnight in Biloxi?
They probably slept on the bus. I mean, it's a good,
Right,
yeah,
right,
they probably
right.
drove all night and
We have
maybe
to look in the Green Book about Biloxi, because
Yeah,
we
pro-
looked in the Green Book, everybody knows what that is, for Eunice, and there was
Yeah.
really nothing in there for Eunice. So, but in
Everyone straight
Biloxi,
to
I
Biloxi,
think, yeah.
yeah.
And then after that gig,
down
they,
to New Orleans.
right,
yeah.
they came to New Orleans. So could you give the personnel and Eunice and the
Sure.
band?
Yeah, it was Russ Phillips on trombone, Barney Bigard on clarinet, Marty Napoleon on piano, Dale Jones on bass, and Cozy Cole on drums.
So who's white? Marty
Marty Napoleon, Russ Phillips, and Dale Jones.
So he had three
Yeah.
white guys in a band playing in Biloxi, New Orleans.
Yeah.
So, but they didn't allow mixed bands in those places, right?
For Louis Armstrong, they made an exception, and he talks about this a lot, because a couple of years later, this is 52, he starts getting criticism. I mean, have we mentioned yet that Berro's was whites only?
Oh, yeah. It's
The
all
audience.
white. I guess people here know that.
Right.
It was white owned and white only audience.
1952.
And he has a mixed band, which I'm sure Joe Glazer must have said, if you had an all-black band, you could get more gigs in the South. And he was like, no,
No, he
I got to get the people who can play the music.
exactly. And I mean, this sets up his exile from New Orleans, where he
Is
doesn't.
this the end, the last time?
The 52 gig on May 13th is the last time he plays a concert in New Orleans until 1965. He comes back in 55, and he actually performs on 2 TV shows filmed here, but one is in a TV studio and one is on the street. The Colgate Comedy Hour let him play with his integrated band on the street, but they wouldn't have him at a venue. And so the 52 concert was, you couldn't pay and get a ticket to see Louis Armstrong in New Orleans for 13 years after that, until the Civil Rights Act passed.
So in the concert in New Orleans, where was that?
The Municipal Auditorium.
So was that all white?
That's a good question. I don't think it was, but I don't know. Maybe somebody here might know.
We
because
could look that up.
Yeah,
Or
that's-
was a
because I
black
know-
audience in the balcony?
He played there in 49, and I do know that many of his African-American friends came to that. I know Joseph Jones came. He brought the first cornet that's downstairs, because there's a whole story about that. So I'm sure, now that I think about it, African-Americans were allowed, but I don't know about seating. And
Okay,
that
we
might
could
have still
check.
been segregated, yeah. But Louis, a few years later, as the civil rights, era really ramps up, Louis starts getting criticized. Nat King Cole starts getting criticized for still performing in segregated venues. But Louis talked about this. He would talk about the nice taste we leave. That was his expression. So, it could be a segregated audience. There's the black section, there's the white section. But then he would do these duets. He would sing Rockin' Chair with Jack T. Gardner, and he sang Rockin' Chair with Russ Phillips, and they would put their arms around each other. And he knew that subliminally he was making a statement. Like what you see on the bandstand, this is what it should be, not what's out there. And if he changed a few people's minds, he talked about playing Houston, and it was supposed to be a segregated dance. And he said when the band started playing, he said all of a sudden everybody started making their way to the bandstand, and they all mixed together. And he said, and he goes, we noticed that. And he said, you're looking out there. And so he saw these changes, with each passing year. And so I think this is an incredible illustration, because how many gigs did he play night after night like Berro's, but we don't have these details. So the fact that we stumbled across Steve and that he had these memories taped and all that stuff.
And photos, right?
Yeah. And it tells you a lot about Lewis's, Lewis knew the South better than anybody. And so wanting to be escorted to the bathroom,
Do you think, did he play, like, okay, so this all-white club, then would he play in a black?
Yeah.
All-black club?
Definitely.
Like Count Basie?
Yep, in the South,
play
he did that a lot.
in both. Even years later, Count Basie, I remember when I shouldn't say unfortunate, but I had to be in Memphis in the 60s when I was asked to leave the South. When we were Basie followers, so he would play in like a black, it was like a barn, black club, and then he'd play and that's already in the 60s.
Yeah.
But he'd play in both.
Lewis talks about it in 57. I mean, 57 is the big year with Little Rock, and he blows his top. But he does this whole tour of the South, and he mentions playing in Savannah in front of an all-black house. And he said when he played You'll Never Walk Alone, he said the whole theater, and he said all black, they all sang along. And he said it was the most touching damn thing he ever experienced on the stage. But on that tour, he goes to Knoxville, and integrated band, integrated seating, and that's when basically the Knoxville KKK, the White Citizens Council, threw a stick of dynamite at the auditorium. And that made headlines all over the world. And Lewis was supposed to go from Knoxville to Nashville to play the Ryman. And at the Ryman, they got nervous about what happened in Knoxville. So at the last minute, they made it segregated seating, African Americans on the bottom and white people on top. And they protested in, all the black colleges around Nashville protested. And Lewis didn't know what was happening. And so he shows up, he had to go in through the back door, and he goes out on stage, and there's a sea of white people up there, and there was about 30 black people, and all empty seats on the bottom because they were protesting. But he didn't know what was happening. And so I think these things, getting dynamite thrown at him, and the segregation and the protests, I think that's what was fueling him. And then it all explodes with Little Rock later in September, in which he just, he can't hold his tongue anymore. But, all that stuff is here too in 52.
What's the Eisenhower year?
57. Little Rock,
That's
yeah.
it. That's it.
So it's all building towards that.
So everybody knows about the letter about Eisenhower, maybe briefly.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's when the Little Rock Central High School was going to become integrated, and then the governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, sent in the Arkansas National Guard to prevent that from happening. And for about 2 weeks, it was on the news every day, these 9 African-American students trying to get into school, and mobs of white people spitting on them, cursing at them, yelling at them. And Eisenhower was just kind of frozen. And so Lewis was given an interview, and he said, the way they're treating my people in the South, the government can go to hell. He said, Eisenhower has no guts. And he did, you couldn't get away with that if you were a black entertainer in 1957. And so, of course, here comes the letters to the editor and all the newspapers that if Louis Armstrong doesn't appreciate this country, he should go back to Africa. There's boycotts of his concerts, boycotts of his records. He gets criticized by white leaders. He gets criticized by black leaders. And he remembered their names. Sammy Davis Jr., Adam Clayton Powell. He called them out. His wife, Lucille, called them out because they attacked him. But now it's seen as like the definitive civil rights moment of Louis Armstrong's life. So, we could talk about this all.
And where was he when he did that interview?
Grand Forks, North Dakota.
North Dakota, right. And then the editor of the newspaper said, oh, no, we can't run that. You have to go back and make sure that he knows if we put that in the paper, people will read it. So he told the reporter, put it in the paper, and he signed his name so that.
He wrote solid on the bottom of it, and he said, don't take out a word. And so in that interview you heard, Steve Picou's parents, they said that Lewis's agent was traveling with him. No, that was his road manager. Lewis had an evil road manager named Pierre Frenchy Talleyrand that everybody hated. He started out as the bus driver, then he became the road manager. He was very tough. He was very gruff. He had to get the band on time, get them to the hotel, get them paid. But everybody in the band knew he was racist, but they also knew he was like the company spy. So he had to make sure that, nobody was hanging around the band, drug addicts and all that stuff. Evil, evil guy. and Frenchie calls the press after Louis makes headlines and says, no, he didn't mean that. He's sorry. He would never say that. He loves Eisenhower. And so Louis called all the papers and doubled down on what he said. And he goes, it's an incredible story. Just look up Louis Armstrong and Little Rock. There's a lot out there. But like I said, that's 5 years after this. So there was a lot of seeing this kind of stuff, segregation, going through back doors, being escorted to restrooms, and then just
And
building.
play every night.
Playing.
Play great.
Playing
I mean,
great.
So you have
Yeah.
a sample?
I do.
Do we have time?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
So fortunately, the New Orleans concert was recorded. It has never been issued. I shouldn't say this kind of stuff, but there was talks of it getting issued, and it kind of died, and so hopefully that comes back one day. But Louis had a copy of it on his reel-to-reel tapes. This is a photograph from that night from the Louisiana Digital Library, from the New Orleans Jazz Museum collection. Marty Napoleon on the left, and then Russ Phillips on trombone, Cozy on drums, Louis, Barney, and Dale. And so I have the recording, and so are we muted back there? I'm gonna sign this up here. And so I figured I wanted to play something, and then maybe as a little bonus, I want to play a joke after that. Louis telling a joke, one step at a time.
Okay.
We have the whole concert. I'll leave it to a vote. Do you want to hear Way Down Yonder, New Orleans, because I thought that was appropriate, or do you want to hear Louis and Velma, since we keep going back to Velma,
Yes.
do You're Just in Love?
Yes.
I think Maxine voted. So we'll listen. We'll listen to Louis Armstrong and Velma doing "You're Just in Love."
Thank you. Can you hear it?
I hear singing and there's no one there. I smell blossoms and the trees are bare. All day long I seem to walk on air. I wonder why. I wonder why. I keep tossing in my sleep at night. And what's more, I've lost my appetite. Stars that used to twinkle in the skies, now twinkling in my eyes. I wonder why.
Pops, you don't need no analyzing, man.
No?
It is not so surprising that you feel very strange but nice. My heart goes pitter-patter. Pops, I know what's the matter, because I've been there once or twice. Put your head on my shoulder. You need someone who's older. Rub down with a velvet glove. There is nothing you can take to remove that pleasant ache. You're not sick, Pops, you're in love. Don't
I
be
hear singing and there's no one there.
not so surprising.
I smell blossoms
Very strange
in
but
the trees
nice.
of there. Look here, Velma. All
My
day
heart
long.
goes pitter-patter.
I seem to walk on
Pops, I
air.
know what's the matter,
why.
because I've been there
I
once or
wonder.
twice.
Swing it, Velma. Swing it on down.
Drape your head on my shoulder. You need some chick that's older. Rub down
No, I
with
don't.
a velvet glove.
I've lost my appetite.
There is nothing you can take
Sky.
to remove that groove in
down there twinkling in my
You're
eyes.
not sick, Pops, you're in love.
What do you mean, gal? I don't dig you.
Oh, you heard me, you heard me. You're not sick, Pops, you're in
So great. So great.
What a team.
Right? And the duet, like
Yeah.
when they, the way they sing together. And, I mean, we all know how he influenced Ella, but it's really sound like Ella.
Oh yeah,
Right?
Velma's great, and that's why the work Maxine's doing is so important. I don't know if Dave Cunion's watching, but he always says the New Orleans Jazz Museum, they want to party with Velma Middleton. That's
Yeah,
one
yeah,
of their,
yeah,
that's one of
yeah.
their slogans here. So I'm so glad you're turning the spotlight on Velma, because Trumma Young, who joins the band in September of '52, said that nobody could follow those two on stage.
Right,
You know,
right.
I mean, just
And she did the split.
the split. It wasn't handstands, right?
She was a dancer starting at age 13. She's born in Oklahoma, and Holdenville, which I wrote to the Oklahoma Historical Society, and I said, I'm doing research on somebody born in 1915 in Holdenville, Oklahoma. Can you tell me who does the research on African Americans in Oklahoma? And they wrote back and said, we have nothing in Holdenville. I'm sure there is somebody, but according to the Oklahoma Historical Society, I'll have to find out for myself, which in my book on Dexter Gordon, they also said there was at first no black history in Fargo, North Dakota, where Dexter's father was from. So, but that wasn't true.
Of course.
You just have to, that's what we do,
That's
isn't
what we
it?
do. Yeah. So we've covered a lot of stuff, a lot of heavy topics, but I want to end with a joke, because at that 1952 concert during the intermission, as you can see from these photos, they had a big ceremony. They unveiled a portrait of the clarinetist Leon Rapolo from the New Orleans Rhythm Kings. They unveiled a portrait of Louis on the right there. And the woman in the back is Myra Menville, who was part of the New Orleans Jazz Club for years. And the Mayor Morrison, gave Louis the keys to the city, and it was this whole big thing. He's holding a proclamation in his hand right there that we have in one of our scrapbooks. And so they give him the microphone to say a few words, and he tells a dirty joke. And this is on the recording, and there's nothing we can do to top this. This joke also appears for comedy fans. Red Fox told variations of this, but this was Louis's favorite joke. I present to you the Hamburger Joke, New Orleans, May 13th, 1952.
Louis, we do want to thank you not only for your jazz, your wonderful trumpet playing, and all those marvelous vocals, but we want to thank you for the wonderful publicity that you've brought to the city of New Orleans.
Thank you.
You know what we feel about you. There's no use telling the audience the story of your life, because they know it, else they wouldn't be here tonight.
That's right.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to unveil the picture if I don't trip. Come on over here and unveil the picture.
Well, can I just say one word
You want to say something?
about the letter that I wrote to Mayor, of thanks. The time I was in the Zulus parade, I was the king, and I wrote him a long letter and thanked him and knocked him out the little gadget I told him in the letter about this waitress in this restaurant, It's about this fella, every time I look around, he's ordering hamburger. So the waitress said next time he come off the job and come in this restaurant, she's going to scratch hamburger off the list. And the minute the fella sit down, she said, "Good afternoon, sir." Say, "I just scratch what you like." So the young man said, "That's all right, miss. Just wash your hands and bring me a hamburger."
Did everybody catch that? I know it's so hard. I know I don't want to repeat this and ruin my reputation, but, but that's the punchline. Just wash your hands and bring me a hamburger. So, I think we're out of time. Does anybody have an urgent question? Yes, John.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
When you played the duet with Velma
Yeah.
Middleton, there was a photograph there where they're playing behind a bar.
Right.
Which reminds me, Lars, is it the Paddock Lounge where the band played behind the bar like that? Like that? You can see the cash register on the stage. Where is that?
I don't know. Yeah, that I've only seen that photo from Dale Jones's collection. And Joe Sullivan was only in the band for 6 weeks. They started out in the Club Oasis in L.A. We have recordings of them in Canada, in Boise, Idaho, but I have not been able to determine where that is. But I'll check the itinerary. January, February, 52. That's all you got with Joe Sullivan. But it's
And what year was that?
52.
Because, he's one of the most famous persons on earth, and there he is on a tiny stage behind a bar.
With the sheet hanging in the back, I think.
Yeah.
That happened.
You're right.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's Maxine Gordon, it's Ricky Riccardi, taken together. The Gordon Riccardi Traveling All-Stars and Motor Kings, or something. All right, we're going to rearrange things for a moment, and we're going to...
That was easy.
Next up, Christopher Renshaw is going to be
They're
talking
supposed
about
to
his
open,
new musical opening in Miami in December.
Hi.
What a Wonderful World. And then we have Adonis Rose, and Ricky will be back with films as we go on. Remember, it's hot outside. Have a cold drink.